Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Season 3 premiere of Mets Off Day Live. I'm your host, Michelle Margaux, joined by SNY contributor Dani Wexelman and Mets radio broadcaster Pat McCarthy. Welcome, guys.
Hello. Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. I like your fancy mic, Pat. Looks good.
Thank you. Just trying to remain official.
You're very official. Well, the first week of the season is officially in the books already. It's so hard to believe, but the Mets are 3-3 following an 11-inning thriller last night. I want to get your overall impressions from week one. So Dani, we'll hear from you first. And then Pat, what are your thoughts on the team as a whole so far?
Yeah, I like 500 coming home and then getting a chance to have the home opener here. I know they weren't necessarily pretty wins, or maybe you felt like they should have demolished the Marlins, but how quickly we forget the Marlins had 3 walk-off wins to start their season, and they're a scrappy team. And then, with the Astros, their pitching staff, I thought outkicked what they're going to do this season. I have them missing the postseason this year. So the Mets, there's definitely a couple areas where you're groaning at them and you're rolling your eyes early, but I will take coming home 500 any day of the week to start the year. I think you're seeing the parity in the league early, and you're just seeing guys still work through some things, right? You're just coming off spring training. You start the season on the road. Nothing is comfortable, and you're missing a couple of guys. So I will take 500 every day of the week to start the year, with the caveat that there are some things I do want to see improved, but I'll give them some time and some mulligans here.
Yeah, I think there's going to be growing pains with this team over the first couple of weeks. So the fact that this team went on the road and finished 500, and 500 sounds a lot better than 2 games under. I think this conversation's a little bit different if Pete doesn't come up and hit that 3-run home run in the 8th inning yesterday. The team figured out ways to win. The Marlins, on paper, shouldn't be a very good team, but have somehow figured out ways to win games, taking 3 or 4 from the Pirates, and then, almost taking 2 or 3 from the Mets. So it's not a perfect road trip by any means, but heading back to Citi Field 500 for tomorrow's home openers is a pretty good start. And it's like Dani said, they're only going to get healthier. And as this starting rotation gets healthy, as Francisco Alvarez comes back, as Jeff McNeil comes back, this team will be in pretty good shape.
Well, one of the most exciting things about the Mets so far this season and off season was Juan Soto. So, Dani, how do you feel about Juan Soto's impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. No matter which way you split it, whatever he may be doing on the field, to me, like I said this in the offseason, I think he's more entertaining. Now, don't get that word twisted. He is more entertaining at the plate than Shohei Ohtani. He is a ticket that you put your butt in your seat and you make sure you don't go get your popcorn, your hot dog, whatever you need. Like, he's the guy you have to see. And the fact that he's with the New York Mets for probably the rest of his career, I'm going to guess, I don't care where he is or what he's doing. I don't care if he's taking a ball. The entertainment factor to me is high, right? He gets his first home run out of the way, which is a huge deal. You can see him with the guys in the dugout hanging out. You can see the way that he's already impacting the other guys on the team too. I think that's a really big deal. But the fact that a superstar like this is with the New York Mets, that guy is going to command attention. He's going to be the difference maker. I know that there was a little hang up on the Josh Hader slider away that he chased, right? And had a chance to give them a win against the Astros in that position. But Josh Hader's a really good pitcher. Juan Soto is going to get him next time. And he's already thinking about that too. So for me, the impact is immediate. It happened the second, ink was on that paperwork for him to sign and be a New York Met for the rest of his career.
Totally. Down in spring training, I mean, the games were electric because Juan Soto was there. Pete Alonso has already been pretty clutch so far this year. What do you think of his heroics?
Yeah, so far so good for Pete, whether it was the grand slam in game 1 against Miami or coming up in the massive spot last night hitting the 3-run home run. This conversation is different if Pete doesn't hit this home run here. It was a 9-pitch battle, and I just think the way that Pete has been able to step up, I think getting that first home run out of the way was huge for him because he can settle in. I would like to think that we're going to see a Pete Alonso that's playing free and easy this season because the pressure's off, right? He's making $30 million. Next year, he's guaranteed to make 24 at the very least, or he can have a monster year and go into free agency and sign an even bigger deal. So if the Mets can get a healthy, impactful Pete Alonso for 162 games, it just completely changes the dynamic of this lineup. And We saw the flair for the dramatics last season in the postseason. We've seen it now 6 games in, and hopefully it's just a little bit of a taste of what we're going to get.
If I could, Michelle, quickly about that, I see it a little differently. I kind of feel like the pressure is on him because he does want to be a Met for life and he wants to have his career finish here. So I kind of feel like there's a different pressure. I think it's different than a contract type year pressure. I think it is, hey, I need to show them still, even with the career that I've had, even if I am potentially going to own the all-time home run record for this team, I feel like he has something to prove because he, of everyone on this team, has the most to lose of all the guys in this lineup who are a part of this staff. To him, like his legacy and wanting to be with the Mets for his whole career hinge on how he does. So I kind of like it. It feels like he's externally motivated. I'm sure internally as well, but I like the external motivation because he's delivering and he looks really locked in. Like if you get this version of Pete for almost 162, I think he could be in the MVP conversation.
Super good point. Also, I did not mean to not point out the fact that you also have a very official microphone. I just didn't see it in the shot. So I'm the only one who doesn't have one.
Okay.
They're both very official. Dani, sticking with you here, though, Francisco Lindor's had a pretty eventful last week. His wife gave birth to their first son, Koa. So congratulations to the Lindor family. He was off to a slowish start, though.
Yeah, the slow start and the uncharacteristic errors too. I think you look at it and you listen to the broadcast and mistakes can be made. They can happen. I can't even imagine, Michelle, and you can speak to this. I can't imagine having to show up and do your job in front of hundreds of thousands or millions of people while your family member just gave birth, right? For you, like you are the one doing that. And for Lindor, that's his wife. And I'm sure that he wanted to be there a little bit longer. I'm sure that he wanted a little more time or just to support her. And then he's got to go out and put a bat and glove in his hands. I have no idea what that must feel like, but it's not easy. There's nothing in my eyes to worry about with Francisco Lindor. Every year, right, we pick apart his game because that's what you have to do to find any flaws in it. You have to literally take the microscope and find a way to dig in and see if, he wasn't exactly perfect here. To me, the dude is so accountable for himself. And you heard him even holding other guys accountable, right? Mark Vientos saying Lindor came up to me after I didn't hustle down the line for the infield hit. To me, like he's doing just fine. He just had the birth of his child. There's a lot going on in his mind, but I'm not worried about him at all.
That's also a very captain-like action, to kind of call guys out and make sure that they're running all the way through. It's a good example. Pat, what about Brandon Nimmo's performance?
Yeah, I think with Brandon Nimmo, he hits the back-to-back home runs in the first 2 games of the Marlins series, but for him, it comes down to just being healthy. And the fact of the last week of spring training, we saw him out there for 9 innings defensively because there were question marks whether he was even going to be able to play defensively or he was going to be a DH for the first couple of weeks as he deals with the knee inflammation and the plantar fasciitis that he dealt with during the offseason and during the postseason. So I think with Brandon Nimmo, it's going to take some time. I think he's adjusting to this new role in the cleanup spot. He's going to have a lot of traffic on base. That was one thing that we saw with him and Mark Vientos, is that throughout this entire season, there are going to be guys on base ahead of him. So it's up to Brandon to cash in and potentially drive in 85, 90, 100 runs. I think Brandon's going to be just fine. I think for him, the key is just staying healthy.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys have ever had plantar fasciitis. I had it a decade ago, and I would never wish it on anybody. It is so painful. So I'm just impressed that he's out there. Their defense has been shakier than expected, though, and Dani mentioned it. Lindor committed the 2 errors in Game 2 against the Marlins. Mark Vientos also had a few questionable plays at third. The defense did come through with 2 huge plays at the plate last night, but Dani, what is your take on the Mets' defensive lapses so far?
Yeah, and they struggled with this last year, too, outside of Francisco Lindor and when Harrison Bader was playing center field. They really did struggle. They weren't, I would say, above average defensively, especially when you compare them to the rest of the league. Here's why I'm concerned is because their starting pitching staff is first in ground ball percentage. And Clay Holmes is also first. He's third in that. And the team is overall first with their staff, right? So you're getting a lot of ground balls from your starting pitchers. You got to make those plays, right? The defense, to me, like that wins ball games. It's the little moments in the game. It's the difference a lot of times times when you win and lose is you can look back and see that miscue. And sometimes that carries over to guys at bats too, right? So I am mostly concerned because their pitching staff is doing a great job of getting a lot of ground balls. The defense behind them has got to shore it up. That's been a point of emphasis for the Mets for a long time. I can think back 3 and 4 years ago during the Billy Epler era. That's why Brett Beatty and Mark Vientos weren't coming up, right? Is because their defense wasn't there. That's down in the farm system, something that they are emphasizing. And so this has to get figured out soon. If they want a chance to get to October, they have to take advantage too of the Braves, right? Starting the season the way that they have, having the Nationals in this division. If you're making mistakes defensively, that is a panic for me, way more than the offense starting slow or the fact that their batting average, I think, is 188. I don't care about that right now. I care about the fact that you can't make the routine ground ball plays.
Patrick, what do you think? I mean, do you think this is just early season rust, or do you think it's a sign of deeper issues?
Yeah, it has been a point of emphasis for this organization to have a strong defense, which is why they brought in guys like Jose Siri, why they brought Harrison Bader in last year, brought Tyrone Taylor in, and others. So I do think it's something that the Mets are going to have to shore up because defense wins championships like it does in most sports. It's a great luxury to have, and you can't afford to give teams extra outs. We've seen it so far come back to bite the Mets over the last couple of games. Fortunately, yesterday they were able to come through with the big hit, and it didn't matter. But overall, they have to clean things up defensively. They have to figure out a way to make the routine play. You don't need guys to make the above and beyond plays, but simply you have to make the routine plays because Danny's right. There's a lot of ground ball pitchers on this team, and there's going to be action behind them. They're not necessarily going to strike out a ton of guys. And if the ball's put in play, pitchers did their job, especially if it's weak contact, and then the defense has to get the job done.
Switching gears, though, Luis Torrens entered in the 8th inning of last night's win, delivered a key hit that sparked the rally before Alonso's home run. He's also 3 for 3 throwing out base stealers on this season. So, Dani, how do you think that Torrens has filled Alvarez's absence?
You guys, I just want to say I didn't give this guy enough love. I did not realize or respect the game of Luis Torrens, and I am so sorry about that because when this dude is behind the plate, do you see how fast his catch and release is when he throws it down? Like, that's elite. What he's doing is elite in the game, and he may not be a guy that we talk about a ton when it comes to elite catchers, but it's time that we do because he has done something. And we go back to the defense, right? He's bailing his defense out. He's bailing his pitcher out when a guy gets on. That is such a weapon for this team, and I am so glad he's a New York Met. I am so glad he is in there. He isn't necessarily Francisco Alvarez, who is younger, right, and up and coming, but he's doing a hell of a job right now. I think he's doing the best job you could ask of someone to come in and do this kind of job with this staff. Like, I am so impressed by him, and they should be so grateful to have that guy, not only who's the veteran dude who can be behind the plate with that staff, but knowing that when a guy gets on base, if he even thinks about taking second or third, he's probably going to be out.
Yeah, hot take. I think when Alvarez comes back, if Luis Torrens continues hitting, he stays. He remains the starting catcher. Pat, they were down by 3 in the 8th when Mendy brought in Torrens. What do you think of that move so early in the season?
Yeah, I think in this situation, Mendy had said in his post-game press conference that he was going to be aggressive with the pitchers. I think that also means that he was going to be aggressive with the position players, and that meant bringing Luis Torrens in. Hayden Sanger's done a really nice job so far in his limited sample size in the big leagues, picked up his first big league hit in yesterday's game. But the fact is, Luis Torrens is a weapon behind home plate. You go back to last season, the Mets were awful at throwing out base runners. They couldn't get guys to stay on first base. It seemed like singles, walks, whatever, were automatic doubles because guys were running wild. Luis Torrens neutralized that, and he continues to do that in this game. And you think about yesterday, he probably is the number one reason why the Mets were able to win that game outside of maybe Pete Alonso for hitting the 3-run homer, because he's the one that started that rally that led to Pete hitting the 3-run homer. And that's a really athletic play to go up the first base line and then swipe back across to make that tag. So I think Mendy was aggressive. I think he had to be. And Luis Torrens right now is such an amazing luxury because he is filled in so admirably. And I think moving forward, we're going to have the conversation about him being the best backup catcher in all of baseball.
I think the Mets world really discovered how good Torrens was behind the dish in London,
Yeah.
that second game against the Phillies. That's when people were really like, well, he's the real deal. Let's talk about Clay Holmes. He made his second start since 2018 in the rubber match against Miami. Pat, how did Holmes' first two outings compare to your expectations?
Well, I think he blew all of our expectations out of the water during spring training when he came in and just absolutely dominated. So I think we had to temper them a little bit because I do think there are going to be growing pains for Clay Holmes as he continues to make this transition. You know, guy went 300 appearances out of the bullpen between starts. So it's going to take time. He wasn't going to be perfect every time. So I think there are going to be bumps along the way. I don't think he's going to be perfect, but I think as long as he's serviceable, he's going to be a really good starting pitcher for this Mets team, hopefully for the entire 162, making 25 starts. And then once Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas and others come back, he's a really, really great depth guy in this rotation. He wasn't brought in to be an ace. He pitched like an ace during spring training, so I think everybody had the expectations that he was going to be an ace during this season. There's going to be growing pains, but I think so far so good for Clay Holmes.
Well, like you said, I mean, the Mets are going to need him at his best because Sean Manaea suffered a setback and his rehab is now shut down for at least 2 more weeks. So he probably won't return, before late May. But Dani, do you think that Clay Holmes can hold down the rotation spot until Manaea returns? What do you think?
Yeah, Pat, you make a really good point, is that they didn't expect him to be an ace. He doesn't have to be a number 1 or even a number 2. To be honest, the luxury of having a guy like Clay Holmes is that he is going to eat some innings. Again, the ground ball percentage for him is really high. He's one of the best to do it in the league right now. And so maybe he's not having the results that we saw in spring. It's still early. I'm not going to knock the guy and say that he can't do it or it's not going to be a successful transition for him, because Jeremy Hefner is a magic maker. Jeremy Hefner, to me, is one of the best pitching coaches and that staff in the entire league, and especially at finding the strengths of guys. I just think Clay Holmes needs a little more time at this big league level, right? Spring training is the big league level, but not quite the same. So I think he needs a little more experience doing it. I think that at the end of the day, and with this season, he, to me, like, he's the guy who is going to save having to use your bullpen, having to ask your starters to go deeper, because you have Clay Holmes and he has that experience. And I'll say this too, a guy who raises his hand and says, after all this time in my career, I've been in the bullpen, but I want to start. I want to make this happen. He showed up early to spring. Michelle, I know you covered that. Like, he showed up early. He worked on his up downs, right? How many times you have to get up and down in an inning. He spent time in Port St. Lucie. Like, to me, he's so committed that I'm going to buy stock right now. It's too early to say the experiment's not working, because I think he can get there, but he is going to be very important. And I do think regardless of who comes back and when, Clay Holmes is still going to lock down that spot because they need guys to eat innings.
Yeah, I agree with that. Pat, does your view of the Mets rotation change with Manaea missing an even longer period of time?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gets more tricky without Sean, maybe through Memorial Day or whenever he's going to come back, because if he's healthy, he's probably the Mets opening day starter. And he was a guy that was so good down the stretch for them, and they expected him to probably be their number 1 throughout this entire season. So the longer that they're without Sean Manaea, obviously they're going to be hurting. So it's up to the guys to step up, right? It's always been next man up mentality for this team. That was it last year. Guys stepped up in massive roles. So how do guys like David Peterson respond? How do they take that next step forward? Does Tyler McGill throw the baseball well? Does Griffin Canning throw the baseball well? These guys that the Mets took flyers on in the offseason, they're going to need to step up until Sean Manaea is back. It obviously hurts the Mets mightily that Manaea is not making a turn through the rotation every 5 or 6 days, but better now in April and middle of May than in August and September. So muscle injuries can be tricky. They take time, and hopefully that means that Sean's going to be back in the near future, and when he is back, he's 100% healthy.
So it's interesting you bring this up. So Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor told the Post Mike Puma that they would love to see the Mets trade for Sandy Alcantara, who pitched against them this week. And I think any team would be happy to see their team trade for Sandy Alcantara. But Dani, he is elite. Are you surprised at all to hear Mets leaders be so open to outside help this early on in the season?
No, I think it's more so the respect that they have for Sandy. I've been lucky enough to cover a couple spring trainings down in Miami. I covered the one where he was coming back from Tommy John surgery too. And this is a guy who would really fit in outside of the stuff that he has, like the Cy Young stuff that he has. He would fit in the clubhouse. He would be able to give them that extra boost. And to me, I did feel like there was something to be desired in the offseason. I thought that the Mets did a good job. David Stearns is a wizard, right? We're really seeing just how smart he is in building teams. Sandy is going to cost a lot. So I like that the guys said that. I'm sure that there were some kind of conversation in the offseason about, because everyone knows the Marlins are offloading and this has been their plan because they want to restock the farm system. It is going to cost a ton of prospect capital to get a guy like Sandy. I believe he has 2 years left on his contract, not just one. I see Pat shaking his head. So like that's even more expensive. It's not like he's a rental. If they get to the trade deadline and want to make a push for October, this is a guy you'd have for a year and a half under the Mets organization. And so that will cost you a ton. But no, I love that they said it. Like, you should say what you want. And it's not an offense or knock to the guys in the clubhouse. I think it's pretty obvious the Mets are going to need some starting pitching help. And who wouldn't want a guy like Sandy, like you said?
Yeah, any pitcher named Sandy is usually pretty good. But do you think it's unfair for us to be talking about bringing in outside help before guys like McGill can't even have a chance to prove themselves? I mean, Danny made a good point. Like, it's not a knock on the guys that are already there. It's more just proving how good Sandy actually is.
Yeah, I mean, Sandy Alcantara, when healthy, is a top 5 pitcher in baseball. It's not a knock on the guys that they have there. He's better. And these guys get that. They understand that this is a business, and any opportunity to make a team better, the Mets are going to do it. Danny's right, though. It's going to cost so much to get Sandy Alcantara in the building. And he's not a rental like a Dylan Cease would be or some other guys. He's a guy that you expect to have here for the next couple of seasons. So it is different for players to go on the record when talking about other players on other organizations, but it's obvious when you watch Sandy Alcantara pitch that as he comes back from Tommy John surgery, he's the same Sandy that we saw win a Cy Young back in 22. He would help this team mightily. There's nobody on this roster that would disagree with that. There's nobody in the media that would disagree that Sandy Alcantara would make this team a much better team. There was always talk about the Mets acquiring an ace. And Sandy Alcantara, if you acquire him, he is an ace.
Yes, he is. We're going to switch gears to the middle infield here. Jeff McNeil continues his rehab. Luis Angel Acuna and Brett Baty have been platooning at second base. So Pat and then Danny, how do you see the second base situation evolving as the season progresses?
Well, I think when Jeff McNeil comes back, Jeff McNeil is the second baseman for this team. And it'll be Jeff's job to lose because the track record's there. It was going to take Baty or Acuna running away with this job while Jeff is hurt to maintain second base full time. The Mets have invested a lot of money in Jeff McNeil. He's a former batting champion. And at the end of the day, a healthy and productive Jeff McNeil makes this team a much better team. It adds a ton of depth in this lineup. But that's not to say that those guys aren't going to get opportunities to play, because one of Jeff's greatest assets is his versatility, that you can send him out to the corner outfields if you need to, and he's going to be an upgrade defensively. That's how good he is. So playing out long-term, I think once Jeff's back, it's Jeff's job. It's just a question of, are one of these two guys going to make that decision a lot harder on the Mets front office and Carlos Mendoza?
It's definitely Jeff's job. But what I love that you're talking about, Pat, and I'll expand it for a second, is how good Carlos Mendoza is at using his versatility to his advantage, giving Juan Soto a day off, right? Getting the younger guy in there. I think where I get frustrated with organizations is when they bring a younger guy up, like a Brett Baty or a Luis Angel Acuna, and then they don't get time to play. There's a difference between playing every day in AAA and sitting on the bench and having almost no experience at the big league level. While that's important, I want to see a guy play almost every day. I think the platoon idea is tough, right? These guys potentially could platoon with the lefty-righty splits between Baty and Acuna, but that is going to be Jeff's job. I know Mendy does a really nice job of finding ways to mix guys in. And so I look forward to seeing how he does that when Jeff does come back, because let's be honest, Baty had an amazing spring. We've seen that story before, but I want to see what he can do with consistent playing time. He learned a new position. People think that you can just go from third base to second base and it's nothing. It's not. It's tough. You're turning a double play, right? You're covering first base. Everything is a little bit different there, and your relays are different. You're thinking about a lot of different things at second base. So I give him so much respect and credit for learning that spot. And for Acuna, if he can play short, he can play second. He can fill in for Lindor. We saw him do it late in the season last year and do a nice job. And so I want to see them get more opportunities and take advantage of time right now, even if they're not hitting out of the park yet. I think this is a great time for them to show Mendy what they're going to be capable of. And if this is for real, right? This is their audition. Are they going to be and stick around to be Mets, or will their names be thrown in for trades? Because if it's not going to work out, if they're not going to be able to do it at the big league level, then you've got to turn it over, unfortunately, right, to business and figure out who can do it. Because we have seen a lot of Brett Beatty, and I'm rooting for the guy. I really am. But I want to see him be able to put it together at the big league level.
Let's talk third base and Mark Vientos. He has struggled both defensively and at the plate so far this season. Pat, do you think that he can bounce back to last season's form, or do you think a regression is just expected because of how good he was last year?
Yeah, the standard was set pretty high for Mark Vientos, so it's natural that in a guy's second season, he's going to regress slightly just because guys are going to make adjustments for him. It's a really small sample size. We're 6 games into the season. I do think the defensive struggles are a little bit concerning just because he was a lot better defensively, especially at making the routine play. So I do think that that's something that they're going to have to shore up, but Mark's going to hit. He's going to have to make adjustments. He did it last year. There were times that he struggled down the stretch for this team. It just took him some time to make some adjustments. And I think situations like this aren't going to necessarily happen again, where he's running hard out of the box and then all of a sudden pulls up. That was addressed, by Antoine Richardson and Carlos Mendoza and Francisco Lindor and others. And this is a situation of him just getting sped up. I think the game's going to continue to slow down for him. He's going to come back out. He's going to be the Mark Vientos that we expected. It's now just his second full season in the big leagues. It's going to take some time to make some adjustments, but this is a guy that is a natural-born hitter. We saw last season during the postseason that the lights are never too bright for him. He has a confidence and a swagger to him that is going to allow him to remain consistent. I understand right now it being concerning, but I think long-term, we're going to talk about Mark Vientos having a really good year.
Dani, is there a world in which the Mets should move Vientos to DH?
Oh, gosh. I'll go back to what I said. I think that it's really hard, and you're seeing it with Rafael Devers right now. I think people underestimate how hard the designated hitter spot is, and I would really hesitate to move a younger guy who doesn't have the experience doing that every single day and taking him out of his routine and trying him there. I understand the thought behind it, and I think that maybe he could work towards that one day, but I'll say this, that, the team in general, which I'm not worried about and I'm not panicked, the team is hitting 188, right? It's not just Mark Vientos who is struggling right now. The entire team is really struggling. They find a way to hit into a double play really easily right now. I think that they're chasing a little bit, they're pressing a little bit. And Vientos, like in my conversations, he's that perfect combination of knowing how confident he is and being humble enough to know he still has so much to learn, which is when you heard him say, I need to take accountability. I know I need to do better than that. That won't happen again. To me, like, no matter how confident you are, you've got to understand that you're not bigger or better than the game. And that's exactly where Vientos sits. And so I still have the utmost confidence that he's going to be the dude because he wants to be, like, and that isn't an extremely great characteristic of a guy, right? Think about the best guys in the game. They want the ball. They want the bat in their hands when the moment matters, and they're going to need him. And so it's early. Like, I'm not concerned yet. I think the DH spot is too big for him to handle right now in his career.
Well, Dani, you mentioned it a little earlier in the show. The Braves have shockingly started 0-7. They were NLE's favorites, but it seems that injuries and Jurickson Profar's 80-game suspension have taken a toll. What's your assessment of the Braves' slow start here?
Oof. Gosh. Nauseating, regretful, sad. It makes me sad because I think that they have a really good team. Like, Alex Anthopoulos, the general manager of that team, has done a great job over the last couple of years locking up their core, bringing in some of the best guys. Not only have they struggled, they get hit with the Jerks and Profar suspension. He's gone 80 games. And even if he comes back, he's not eligible for the postseason. So they really, man, they're getting it from every corner. When it rains, it pours, and it's pouring on the Braves. I think I heard this morning on radio that there's never been a team to start 0-7 and get to the postseason. I could be wrong on that, but I attribute it to the fact that they're not putting it together. They look like a team that's like played with each other for the first time. You saw last night, Iglesias gives up the walk-off. Like, Raisel Iglesias is one of the best in the game, and he gives up the walk-off to Shohei Ohtani. Now, they've run into a buzzsaw, right? I'll give them a little credit here. They started with the Padres and then went to the Dodgers. Like, that's not easy for any team. I have higher expectations for them, though, and I don't really care that they started 0-7. There's no way that I'm going to take them softly and think that they're not going to be a good team this year. They'll put it together. They've had some injuries that they're dealing with too, but they just look like baby deer who've never walked before playing baseball. And I hope that they figure it out.
It has been 42 years since a team that started 0-7 finished with a winning record, just saying. So, wow. Pat, how does that impact the Mets?
Well, it impacts the Mets because it gives them an opportunity to win the division with one less team ahead of them. I mean, that was the biggest thing last year, right? When this team was under 500, it was, how are they going to leapfrog 6 teams? How are they going to get to past 7 teams to get to the wild card? Because no matter how well you play, you're then relying on other teams losing. So the fact is right now that the Braves are so far behind, the Braves are the ones that are going to have to climb out of the basement. 7 games under is 7 games under. The Braves aren't going to be this bad all year. It definitely seems like the sky is falling right now, but they're going to get healthy. Spencer Strider's on his way back. Sean Murphy's on his way back. They're going to get Ronald Acuna Jr. back at some point. But at the end of the day, for the Mets, it's just one less team that they have to chase. It seems like right now the Phillies are playing like the team that's going to repeat in the National League East. But again, we are 6 games into this season. It's such a small sample size. I know they say you can't necessarily miss the postseason in April, but the Braves are making that mighty close right now. They have to figure it out, because otherwise they're going to move into the summer months trying to make up 10 or 11 games, which, as we saw from the Mets, you quite literally have to play 600-700 baseball in order to climb out of that type of hole, which isn't easy.
No, it's not. One last topic here before we wrap up. The Mets bullpen has been outstanding to start the year. What has surprised you most about this group of relievers, Pat?
Well, I think right now Max Kranick is the one that you look at and think this is the biggest surprise, just because you didn't necessarily know what to expect from him. A guy that hadn't pitched in the big leagues in 3 seasons, was really impressive during spring training, but hasn't even been a full-time reliever for over a year. So you didn't necessarily know what to expect from him, but they're in the position that they were in yesterday because of what Max Kranick did 2 days prior. The fact that he went out and gave them 3 innings meant that they had a fully rested bullpen going into yesterday's game. So Clay Holmes gives just 4 2/3, and Mendy's able to be really aggressive and run through his entire pen, knowing that they had the off day today and knowing that they had a fully rested bullpen. So outside of the situation where Danny Young had some issues in mop-up role in the first game of the Marlins series, this bullpen has been absolutely spectacular. And moving forward, they're going to need them, because pitchers aren't necessarily going to go 6 or 7 innings every single time. The Mets are going to need 12 or 15 outs from the pen consistently. And so far, this bullpen looks like it's capable of doing so.
Dani, I mean, we can attribute a lot of these successful happenings, whether it's offensive or relievers turning into starters, to David Stearns. What makes David Stearns such a strong evaluator of relief talent in particular?
Well, I think when it comes to his roots in Milwaukee does one of the best jobs drafting guys. You want to know why? Is because they often can't lure the big free agent to come and play in the middle of the country, right? So you have to develop them. And then, for example, you give Jackson Chourio a long-term extension because you want to keep your talent there. And so that's the mindset he has now in the largest market in the country, with the biggest and deepest pocketbooks in the country, right? With Steve Cohen at his side. And so So he's got the mentality of finding the best of guys. And when he says, hey, we're going to bring in Max Kranick, or we're going to pick up this guy, you maybe sit back at home on your armchair, and I do too. And I think, what is going on? What is David Stearns thinking? But his mindset of really, like, it's what can you squeeze out of a guy? And knowing that you have Jeremy Hefner and that entire staff, and how they use these guys in ways that no one else saw. It's very Tampa Bay Rays, right? The Rays find a way. If the Rays are interested in a guy, it's because they've identified something, and David Stearns does the same thing. To me, it's that small market, medium-sized market mentality, knowing that you got to get the best out of everyone you bring in. And how can we find a guy that no one was paying attention to and bring him here and help us out and kind of revamp him a little bit? So I just think it's the mentality that he's had. Like, he is a genius at what he does, and he's doing it in a way that he's saving a couple bucks too. Because I have a feeling down the road, I know it's funny, right? I have a feeling down the road that there's going to be some more splashes outside of Juan Soto that's going to cost the Mets some money. And David Stearns is finding ways to say, hey, let me help you out in this department so that we can spend big, continuing to spend big for the Mets.
He's so good at thinking outside the box. Okay, before we go, the most important question of the entire show. The home opener is tomorrow against Toronto. Who is winning the inaugural 5 boroughs race?
Oh, God.
How does Queens not win the first one?
Yeah.
And the other thing too is Manhattan and the Bronx, as a draft and a skyscraper, a little top heavy. I worry about them falling over.
You've thought about the physics of it all. That's nice.
Yeah, it's got to be Queens. It has to be Queens for the first one. And if it's not, I mean, don't put your money on that. I don't believe anything I say. Pat and Michelle for sure. But if it's not Queens, that's like the greatest tragedy of the year, I feel like.
I feel like we need odds. You know what I mean? Like, what did Vegas say?
There's somebody out there. There's somebody out there that probably has them.
Like prop bets. This is great. All right. That is going to do it for us here on Mets Off Day Live. Thank you so much, Dani and Pat, for joining us. You can catch our next episode on Thursday, April 10th. You can also watch Blade Tidwell and the Syracuse Mets on SNY at 6:35. Always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
See ya.